Hello and good evening and welcome to Politics 101, our Thursday night edition. Welcoming all of you wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from inside of the inside Guyana or you're joining us from further afield, whether it is in the United States or our Caribbean. Welcome to Politics 101. Tonight, we are going to be continuing that discussion with uh, brother, brother Vincent Alexander. That discussion on what's happening at GCOM. As you know, Vincent talked last week about ongoing registration, and there are some issues. There are some issues there that we want to discuss tonight. So Vincent Alexander is here and ready to engage that discussion. So please share the link, share the live, and let everyone know that we are on. We're on. Politics 101 is ready to roll. And tonight we are going to, as we say, discussing issues that have to do with the elections, in particular with the registration that is going on. Um, some interesting information. Vincent and I were on a program last night on GlobeSpan, and Vincent was able to bring to bear on the discussion some of the information that we are going to be analyzing here tonight. So share the link, let everyone know that we would be discussing. We're talking about um, the legal framework. We want to talk about that tonight, or how the legal framework or lack of a proper legal framework aids or not aid the electoral process, national registration, the provisions for registration of births, and the erosion of transparent elections. These are some of the subtopics we'll talk about tonight. Um, the registration is going on, and what there's some things that are showing up in the registration that are worrying, and we want to talk about that. We want to talk about that. We want to talk about the fact that it's now easier to get birth certificates and so forth. How does that play in to this old discourse of an electoral machinery that is fair and transparent? So let's be ready for that conversation. You know, they tell us these days that we are a nation of minorities. That is, there is no majority ethnic group. All of us are minorities, meaning all the ethnic groups in Guyana below 50. And it follows, therefore, according to the gurus, that we ought to be looking for votes across the ethnic divide, because no one party is going to be able to get a majority, you know. And we want to talk about that because your share and your ethnic share of the population does not mean that that is the your ethnic share of the the electoral roll. I mean, you know, the population size. You have to talk about for elections. You're talking about the population size that is over 18, and the population size over 18 may not reflect the population size at large. That's the first thing, to follow them with that nonsense about because we are a nation of minority, it means that there is no thing. And then you have the population size of over 18, and then the population size that register. Over 18 means that you are eligible to vote. But what size of the people, what percentage of the people who are eligible to vote are registered? And how does that break down ethnically? And then when you register to vote, do you vote at all? Do you turn out? So you may start out with Indian Guyanese with 40% of the population. But when you get down to those who are eligible to vote over 18, the Indian Guyanese portion of those over 18 may go from 40 to 44, may go to 50, you don't know. And even if it goes to 44, and then you get down to how many of those who are eligible to vote registered. If more East Indians register to vote than African Guyanese and Amerindian, that carries up the Indian Guyanese figure. And then when you register to vote, do you actually turn out to vote? So voting, the elections are not about population size necessarily. The population size gives us a general sense of the breakdown of the population, but it does not necessarily correspond to who go out and vote on the day. And so those people who are trying to poke their finger in our eyes and trying to say that we are foolish, we want to let them know we're not foolish. But anyhow, we're going to be talking about these issues tonight. And of course, Vincent Alexander is here. So please share the link. Let's bring Vincent in and get started, because we want to finish promptly at 8 tonight, because Vincent has another engagement. Vincent, good evening.
Good evening, David.
Your volume.
Good evening to your viewers.
Yes. Thank you, Vincent, for agreeing to coming on tonight at short notice. You and I were on Glospan program last night, and you made some revelations there that stunned me. And so I thought that we should very quickly discuss it on this program so our people have a sense of what is happening. I want to start off by having your thoughts on the issue that I introduced the program on, and that is. Are you hearing me? Vincent, are you hearing me? Are you hearing me, Vincent? Vincent seems to be having some problems.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm now hearing you.
Yes, I am. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
I'm here.
Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, good. I said we wanted to start off on the issue.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Yes. I want us to start with the issue that I introduced the program on, and that is, does the population size in the census, is that a true reflection of those who actually are eligible to vote?
That's a very interesting angle, David. First of all, we really don't have the results of the census. So we start off not knowing exactly what's the population size. But I think you have made a critical point that to look at the global population size does not tell the true story or the whole story, because in the first instance, we have a register of registrants, which includes those persons who have been registered. And so right away, you have to look at those numbers as opposed to some global consensus figure. And immediately I want to introduce an element into this. Previously in Guyana, until very recent, not being registered was an offense. One could be charged for a criminal offense of not being registered. One of the things which have happened after 2020 elections in the tinkering with our legal framework is that has been removed. So it's no longer an offense not to be registered. So we're not driving everybody to get registered by a deterrent, which is that you could be charged for not being registered. So that's the first point I want to make. But to answer your question, but as I said, we will discuss the legal framework, and we see immediately that something has been tinkered with, where people need not register, and it's no longer an offense. And that goes against the grain of what's happening across the world, where registration is mandatory. And in some countries, it is so mandatory that if you don't register and if you don't vote, even if you don't vote, uh, action is taken against you in terms of being able to access certain services, including bank services, etc. So the second point is that even in terms of those who are registered, uh, we are dealing with a register that goes from age 14. So again, we have to look in terms of elections to those who are over age 18. Those who actually are going to vote are the ones over age 18. And so there is also the big question of, yes, these people are registered over age 18. Like I said, some people don't get registered. It's not an offense any longer. But over age 18, we have people who are registered. The next question that arises is, what's the real population who come out to vote? And that's a big question in Guyana, because those people over age 18 who are registered are representative of, at this point in time, over 600 something thousand people. When in fact, if we were to go to look at the last census and other things like that, our population over 18 shouldn't be more than around 500,000. But yet we have over 600 something thousand. And we know that of that amount, uh, hundreds of thousands are living overseas. So you have a lot of people who are overseas who are the role. And so when we say to ourselves that we have a turnout of 70% in one population and 80% in another population, that again can be very, very misleading. Because if we were to determine the actual number of people in the country from that 600 and something, then the percentage should really be against that number of people. And we don't ever come down to that. So that we're in a position where we really don't have data to drive our understanding of what happens at election time. It's a general problem, and it's a problem specific to elections. We don't have the data, and therefore we're not able to say exactly what our turnout is uh, among that population 18 to 18 plus. But you know,
Vincent, I
David,
want
there
to
are some
slow
things
you
that
down.
we can
I want to
use.
slow you down. Because I want you to repeat that. I've heard you with it before, and I want you to go slowly and repeat it. When we say we have 70% turnout, 80% turnout, we are talking about those figures against the bloated list of 600 and something thousand.
Against the voted list. Correct.
Right. So if we
Correct.
were to get rid of the voters list and bring it down to what it is, it would be 70% of, let's say, 400,000 as opposed to 600,000.
Well,
If we
it
were to
would go
get
up to
rid of
more
the
than
voter,
70, it would go up to more than 70%.
it will, that 70% of 6,000 will now be 70% of 4,000. It would be, well, not 70% of 4,000, as you say. It will go
It
up.
will be a greater percentage of a smaller number.
So we
So
do
that's
not
that's
know.
that's one of the issues.
Right.
A
We
greater
do not
percentage of
know.
a smaller number.
We do not know what the turnout is. We do not know what the turnout is in the global election. Those who went out on election day. We don't know necessarily what it is for the different ethnic groups, for youth, for that, because of that bloated list. We are talking about
That's true.
70% turnout or 80% turnout of a bloated list that include, in some people are saying, what is the number? What is the number now? Because I think I heard you recently said that that number has increased. The number of
We're over
people
600,000 now.
over 600,000 now. So, and if we were to clean up that list, it could come down to 500 and something, maybe 400 and something thousand. So,
Correct.
so I just wanted you to repeat that because that is crucial. We do not even know for sure what our turnout is. how does that?
Certainly, we do not
How,
know. But I want to
do not
make an
know.
observation about what happens in the communities. I want to make an observation about what happens in the communities
Yes,
on
go ahead.
election
Go
day.
right ahead, Vincent.
There is an element on election day. And David, I'm quite sure you might have observed this. If you go into an Indian Guyanese community, there is a booth not far from the polling station where people can go and check their names and then they go and vote. The purpose that booth serves also is to identify who has not turned out to vote.
Hmm.
Who has not turned out to vote. You don't have a lot of that in the African Guyanese community. It is more prevalent in the Indo-Guyanese community. PPP catchments. The reality is this, that there is a lot of peer pressure in terms of going out to vote. And there are repercussions if you don't go out to vote.
Hmm.
So it's in the Indo-Guyanese community where they have these, almost every village has a place where you pass, they take off your name, then you would know that if you don't go, they would know you haven't gone.
Hmm.
And if you haven't gone, then there'll be repercussions for you after elections. So that in fact, people are in some communities literally forced to go and vote by virtue of the mechanisms that are in place. And in that regard, something new is being imposed. GCOM has recently come up with this idea that they want to put cameras in the place of poll. And they're saying that the reason for doing this is to ensure that nothing irregular goes on in the place of poll. Now, these are the people who argue that the system is perfect and there's no need for biometrics. But now they want to put cameras in the place of poll. I tell you what cameras in the place of poll can do as opposed to what they can do. Cameras in the place of poll can't stop something from happening. Unless you have somebody monitoring those cameras and something happens, you're going right away. Other than that, it really will be a source of what happened on review. On review. Now, on review, it means that if a political party pays somebody to vote, pays somebody to go and cast a vote, and the person doesn't turn up, then they can go to those cameras and determine if the paid persons did not turn up, and they can then take action against those persons. So it has two sides to the coin. On one hand, somebody knowing the camera will be in there, they take money, they gotta go and vote. And secondly, if they take money, they don't go and vote, there's a mechanism to determine that they took the money and they didn't go and vote, and it'll be dealt with after. So some of these things which seem to be measures to improve the quality of our elections could well serve a particular interest and a particular party's interests. Because we have a situation in Guyana where the contention is that people take cameras into the polling booth. They take a pic of the party for whom they have voted so that they can account for their vote in relation to who paid them. GCOM has refused in the past to forbid the taking of cameras into the booth. So we have not forbidden people from having a camera to account. But now, this same organization is proposing to put cameras in the polling station. You won't be able to see who the person votes for, but you'll be able to see who turns up. So if you have a staging post in the Indo-Guyanese community, you can check that at the staging post. If you don't have a staging post in the Afro-Guyanese community, what you pay Afro-Guyanese to vote, you now have access to a camera in the polling station that can tell you that guy who you paid didn't turn up. What is happening here, David, is that after 2020, a whole range of things have been done and are being done. If you review them carefully, you can see they were part of a mechanism being put in place for the benefit of certain political actors. So allow me to start from the top.
Yes, please do.
Allow me to start from the top. Stage one of this process is the personnel who have been put in place. We have seen that after the elections 2020, the CEO was removed, the DCO was removed, and other levels of officials were removed, all of whom were Afro-Guyanese, and all of whom they would argue were involved in some act in favor of the PNC or the APNU AFC. They have been removed. But what is worse is by whom have they been replaced? In the case of the CEO, they have brought back somebody who was in the system who did not have the required qualification for the job of CEO because he did not have the required years of experience. And with a 4-3 vote, they gave the person the job. He did not have the required experience, and what they sought to argue was that he used to be a scribe and therefore he was close to the system, and they'd used that to substitute for what we had required in terms of years of experience at the level of a DCU. Did not have it. Nobody can question me on that. Became CEO. So you put in place your CEO. Then they dilly and dallied in terms of a place for DCU. What in fact they were doing was trying to give the person they wanted sufficient time to get the experience so that they could qualify for the job. We fought the case, they didn't get enough time, and they had to go ahead. And they did exactly what they did with the DCU, with the CEO for the DCU. He did not have the required time, and they barefacedly 4-3 said, look, this is our better candidate, we appointed him. So they replaced, they got a DCO whom they wanted. In the face of competition of persons who are more qualified. In the case of the CEO, the Jamaican guy was far more qualified, both in terms of electoral experience and academic experience, academic qualifications. In the case of the DCO, there was someone else from the system who had the required experience and the required qualification, and they went ahead and gave the person who didn't have the required experience the job. So the first point I'm making here is that they have dealt with the manpower to man the system in a manner to ensure that, quote unquote, their people are in charge. So that's the first thing. Second thing is then they looked at 2 acts, the Representation of the People Act and the National Registration Act, and purport to have done things to enhance the electoral regime. So let's look at the Registration Act. Previously on the question of registration, you had to do a verification of the person at the place of residence. So you had to go after somebody came to the office and got registered, go back to the home and see that that person actually resided there. What they now say in the National Registration Act is that you have to verify the address and not the person. So if somebody gives an address, once you can verify that address, then the registration is complete. Now that has all sorts of implications for general elections and for local elections. Because now you are not necessarily verifying from a local election perspective that the person lives there. And so people who don't live there can now easily go and cast votes, so you can rebalance your voting population. Where you're weak, you take people into that area to boost the numbers from an area where you're strong. So that affects local elections that way. But something has been happening in the present registration process that exploits that situation. You know, the contention about the population figures have changed, and the Indo Guyanese are not as many as they used to be, and all of that. And so, what has been occurring is that people have been, and I'm giving a specific example, in the quarantine area, have been coming to be registered, who, if you speak to them, they can't give you an address in the quarantine area because they don't have one. In fact, if you speak to them, they will tell you they come from West Demerara, but they are now resident in Suriname.
Hmm.
So what is happening? They're bringing in these people from Suriname. They're not taking them to where they belong because they don't belong there anymore. They're giving them an address close to the border so they can now register in quarantine. The addresses, of course, are addresses that exist, so it's not their valid address.
Right,
But the
right.
law says you just need to verify that the address exists. And so they're bringing them, giving them addresses, and they're being registered. So there's an attempt to rebalance the demography of the actual voters by bringing in cross-border voters. In this instance, there's a clear example of quarantine. They don't come one at a time, they chaperone, they come in buses with a chaperone who provides them with the addresses that they should use, and they go and they get registered. So rebalancing is going on from that perspective. And that might well also occur on the hinterland borders, but the evidence that is irrevocable is the occurrence at this time on our eastern border. So that tinkling with the law about not needing to verify if the person at the place of address has made it easy for somebody in Nigeria to do a day trip to come and get registered, and may similarly do a day trip or a 2-day trip at voting time. But the person is not an active Guyanese, but they're rebalancing the demography, given their own contention that less Indians now and more gone away, and things like that. And the address issue is also a critical issue in this regard, that we really don't have a uniform, comprehensive address system in this country. You know, in America, you got something called a zip code.
Hmm.
You use that zip code, it pins you down to a specific geographical area. And then in that geographical area, you have a house address. We don't have that in Guyana. So somebody address could be Bush Lot. They ain't got to tell you which lot in Bush Lot. It's just Bush Lot, the village. And the postman know everybody in the village and they get the letters. So that, again, you're not even sure in terms of addresses that the person lives at a particular place in a village, because we don't have a system outside of the urban areas that specifically give addresses to every lot and to every person who lives in a lot. So that's one element of the legal arrangements to facilitate certain things to happen. Another element of the legal arrangement goes to the question of registration of birth.
Hmm.
Registration of birth. Now, GCOM became very, very strict from 2008 and said, look, you have to come to us with a birth certificate. You're not taking all them old time methods with somebody say they test that you the person and so forth. You have to come with a birth certificate. And what has happened? They have now adjusted the birth certificate regime to say that somebody who was never registered, whose birth was never registered, irrespective of his or her age, that person can bring 2 affidavits. one from a two show, another one saying where they're born and all of that. And that gives the person a birth certificate. So that what can happen now is somebody who is not even a Guyanese can get an attestation at the level of the village, and with that attestation can acquire a birth certificate, which is then used to do registration. So that lets in another category of people who are not necessarily Guyanese, who are not necessarily entitled to be registered because they come in with some attestation that they're born in Guyana, irrespective of the age. And to say to me that, it's a Tushao who gives the um, affidavit doesn't say much because we know how heavily politicized are the elections in these villages to ensure that party people control the office of Tushao. So don't tell me about an affidavit and the person could be charged. We know how corrupt the system is bottom up. But what we've also found, David, that's of interest, that parallels this operation I just mentioned, is that GCOM facilitates registration by passport. I don't know that the National Registration Act specifies that. National Registration Act may have given some leeway to the chief, the commissioner of registration, to give some flexibility as to whether you use a birth certificate or a passport. But I don't think it's specified in the National Registration Act. But we have put into our manuals the use of a passport. And so here what we have found. We have found an instance, and not one instance, but I'm saying things that are evidential. We have found a situation where people turn up to get registered. And if perchance we do some document checks before going through total registration process, we find that we have people with identical coordinates, meaning they have the same address, they have the same name, right? Identical coordinates. And the question is, how do people have the identical coordinates? Yeah, it's not impossible. It's possible. But when you check on those instances, you find that one of the persons register with a birth certificate and one register with a passport.
Mm-hmm.
The trick in it is this. I can go borrow your birth certificate. Might not be a Guyanese. I can borrow your birth certificate and then come to GCOM, then go to the immigration
Passport.
office
Yes.
and get a passport.
Mm-hmm.
And then come back to GCOM rather than bringing a birth certificate now. You bring a
Bring a
passport to force you and
passport.
got a birth and you
Lad.
register. So that you
Yay.
have somebody being able to register who is not entitled because the person does not have an original and valid Guyanese birth certificate. But having used the birth certificate of someone else, that person gets a passport and gets registered. Now you can't catch those people with biometrics because it's two different people.
That's right.
But
That's
it's
right.
one source document. But what you do, you use the primary document in one instance for registration and the secondary document with this secondary document being backed in another agency by the primary document. So there again, you have a problem where our letting in registration by a passport facilitates fraudulent registration. And I make the point that the law did not specifically provide for the use of a passport. But down the line, the weaker elements of the law, this instance, I think, is a manual of GCO. We are provided for the use of a passport. But People have stumbled upon these cases. We don't know how many of these have gone through, but people have stumbled upon them. And therefore, again, we're seeing there's a flaw in the system. The point I want to make, David, is that after 2020, the government said they were doing transformational things about the law affecting elections, Registration Act, Representation of the People's Act. But none of these transformational things that they have done are addressing the issues that I am raising. Those issues have been allowed to fester. Transformational things are like, for example, this idea that you can now go and put a camera in the place of phone, which really is not enhancing anything. All it is doing is facilitating an actor who may be paying people to go and vote, be able to go and check a camera to say, well, I pay you and you didn't vote. That camera in the place of phone does not enhance any of our processes. It certainly is not a deterrent. Certainly is not a deterrent. Now, in that regard, again, we have a situation where, in terms of the legal framework, the recount revealed this multiplicity of people who are overseas who are voted for. And presumably some of them are dead. We are now having enhanced mechanisms locally for taking the dead off of the list. Enhanced mechanisms, police station reports and things like that. But no attention has been given to how do you get the overseas dead off the list. And that, for me, is the greater number of where our system allows irregular voting. Now, we know that in the United States of America, for example, the information on death is public information. And so it's not beyond us to have a system where we go to those registries to determine Guyanese who have died overseas to take them out of this. But that's not a part of what they're doing. That's left open. But they're beefing up the local mechanisms and leaving the one that is most susceptible wide open. So the point I'm making, and I'm repeating the point, is that on one hand, you see them doing things that they say are going to enhance the system. But in the areas where enhancement is really required, no action is being taken. And so we also see that there is a tremendous dragging of the feet on the question of biometrics, because that's another area where enhancement is required. And we have only gotten to the stage with biometrics where some so-called feasibilities have been produced for us to discuss whether or not we'll implement biometrics. When in fact, in relation to biometrics at the place of registration, this matter had been agreed to years ago. And what is that? When somebody comes to be registered, presently, we take manual fingerprints. Manual fingerprints are not necessarily perfect. In fact, we know they're not perfect because in 2018, 2019, that registration process, we had a lot of hits, had a lot of instances where the overseas people who cross-check say we can't cross-check that because it's bad. So we had multiple numbers, thousands that couldn't be cross-checked because the fingerprints were bad, they're manual. The way to correct that, and therefore to make your cross-checking perfect, is to use electronic, digital fingerprints. Because when you're doing digital fingerprints, the machine does not accept a fingerprint that is not perfect, so to speak. And so you are guaranteed that when you do digital fingerprints, all of your prints can be cross-checked. And you can't have seepage in your system because you couldn't cross-check all of your fingerprints. So that this is something we should really be doing because the problem has raised its head. It's not a problem we are conjecturing about. We saw in 2018, 2019 that the provider of cross-checking said, look, we can't cross-check some of this stuff because the manual fingerprints are not good. We're not addressing that. We're not addressing that. We're dragging our feet on that. And although we had agreed in the 2019 budget in the first instance to acquire the machinery to do fingerprints digitally, we are at the point now where we're saying we got to do some feasibility before we can go to that with all sorts of reasons given why this might not be the best way to go. And so we are left there stuck in between going and not going with an election around the corner. So the next problem you're going to have is you don't have enough time. And that is only about the fingerprints in terms of fingerprints when you do registration. But worse yet, fingerprints in terms of when you're doing voting. That too, we have not committed to. We have a feasibility, and that feasibility is saying a whole range of reasons why you should be cautious about using fingerprints for identification purposes at the place of poll. So again, we're not plugging a hole because we saw in the recount how many persons who weren't present were voted for. And so biometrics would cut that out. But let me tell you something else that has happened. During the recount, a lot of information was thrown up for verification to support the argument that people who weren't present were voted for. GCOM was given a lot of information. In the first round, GCOM sent that information to the immigration office. And the immigration office verified instances of about 70 to 80% verification that yes, these were names of people who were out of the country, but the names struck off on the pink list showing that they were voted for. The PEP came out, brought one or two examples of people who said they were in the country and said this thing is not true. But the immigration office verified 70 to 80%. So you could find two or three, but it doesn't mean the thing didn't happen. We did not push, we did not deal with that. And so in terms of the legal framework, we have not now gone to deal with this mischief by putting in place laws which would say that if you determine this kind of act before the results are declared, then you take action. No, that is still left for what they call an after-election petition.
Petition.
So you get a result, and then you have to go for petition, and we know what happens with petitions. Struck down for technical reasons, as in 2006 when the AFC was cheated in Linden. But in addition to that, the goodly Attorney General has quarantined and corralled all of the information other than that which had been verified by immigration. Collected all from GCOM. I think he even went to the court to get an order to collect all that information. Now, in the normal course of things, he is in a position to take the information and to do the verification. Even government. They've got to pass it to Home Affairs and say, could you verify these thousands of claims of people not being in the country? Rather than do that, almost 2 years have passed, and those documents, you not hear about them anymore. So here's another act that has occurred that seeks to muffle and stifle certain areas where there is clear evidence that there is need for interrogation and there is need for some kind of measure to ensure that the infractions do not occur. So we are pretending and have the whole world pretending with us that we have the best measures at the place of poll. Nobody can get past those measures, even in the face of evidence that the measures have been gotten past. And with the material to test the system, we're refusing to test the system, refusing to recognize those which were tested, refusing to deal with laws that can become a deterrent to those things occurring, or laws that can, if they occur, impact the electoral process positively before the declaration. So that what we really have here, David, is a menu of things. Isolatedly, they might look like good measures. So isolatedly, you say, we make it easy for people to get birth certificates because plenty Guyanese didn't have. That's what we say. So if you look at it as isolated, you say, yeah, man, Guyanese getting birth certificates. But if you look at the chain, the impact that can have on an election, you can see that these things which isolatedly have been argued in Parliament and justified, in the context of our electoral regime, these are mechanisms to weaken the regime, mechanisms that will give legitimacy to infractions, and the mechanisms that can be used by parties. And the evidence so far, in terms of who are bringing people to get registered, the evidence of who don't want us to check, verify the persons who are seen to have been voted for, suggests that there's a particular party which has an interest in these things.
Vincent Alexander tonight giving us more than a mouthful, and my goodness, as most of you are saying, excuse me, saying here, this is very important information, very, very important information. And in any other society, this would be the headline news in tomorrow morning's papers. But as you know, in our country, there is a competition between the traditional media and the social media. So even when information of this nature is being given on social media, the traditional media doesn't carry it from the opposition side. They often quote from government ministers' Facebook page and so on and so on and so forth. But this information, all Guyanese should have this information. Vincent, you have very importantly emphasized the way in which the laws have been tinkered with over the last 4 years or so. That a lot of this is now has now been done because they have messed with the laws. And a lot of questions here in the comment section are asking, can these things be challenged?
The way in which these things have been done, they really should be challenged at the point of legislation.
Mhm.
And I would think that some of them were challenged, probably not as vigorously as they should have been, but were challenged. But it shows you the danger we have in a system where a one-seat majority could determine the fate of the entire nation. So that even in the instance where these things were challenged, the level of the legislature, the legislation was pushed through because those who brought the legislation knew why they were bringing the legislation. I think there are some other things that probably could be challenged. It's kind of it will take progressive and radical legal minds to challenge those things in the face of our very conservative and positivist um, legal system. But I think there are things that could be challenged because the logic of these things, and not only the logic of these things, but the evidence. Because I'm being evidential, I'm not just conjecturing.
Right.
I'm being evidential on these matters. And from that standpoint, with progressive and aggressive legal representation, these things could be challenged. But challenging things have three levels. You have the legislative level, and our system, as we know, does not allow for the minority to impact, no matter how good or logical the argument is, the decisions in Parliament. So really, we don't have a Parliament where there's a practice of democracy. The will of the people is equivalent to the will of the ruling party, full stop. So there's a problem with challenging things at the legislative level. There is a challenge at the legal level, but I think we need to explore that more and more. Well, you know, in a real democracy, David, lots of things are really challenged at the people's level. We saw what happened in Kenya recently,
Mm-hmm.
where the people of Kenya had a problem with the taxation, and the legislative level didn't make any sense, the legal level didn't make any sense, but the people's level made sense. And
Even the trade
let us
union,
understand,
even at the trade union
huh?
level, it didn't make sense. Even at the level of
It didn't
trade
make sense.
union, it didn't make
It
sense.
didn't make
Yeah.
sense. The people's level made sense. And the people's
Yeah.
level, you must understand, is the real level. Why is it the real level? We are a republic. A republic means the sovereignty of the people. This question of parliament and all of that is just an efficient mechanism, or supposedly the efficient mechanism to represent the people's interests. But at the end of the day, it's the people's interests and the people's voices which have to be the final and determinant voice. And therefore, in the instances where our systems are flawed, where we can't get out of the representative system what we ought to get out of it at the legislative level, and where there are legal problems, you know, a petition takes how long? A government can spend all its time in government in the face of petition, then probably the people's level is the level which we have to resort to have changes that will then stop these things from happening in the first instance and transform the regime at the legislative and judicial level so that those levels can be effective. They are ineffective. And so let me go on to reference the Ashikisun matter,
Mm-hmm.
because this again shows you the issues we have at the legislative and at the executive level, so to speak. Everybody has accepted Ashikisun is squatting on a seat. Everybody has accepted that. The PPP have accepted it silently because it benefits them. They've been able to use her to corral the deputy speaker's position, to squeeze the opposition out of that position. They're comfortable with her and they're silently endorsing her capture of a seat, which does not belong to her. Now, that action involves legislative connivance in this sense that Mr. Ford, who nobody can prove is not the leader of the list for the TMM, wrote to the speaker recalling this lady, and the speaker, I'm not even sure he acknowledged the man's letter. The clerk, who should really act on these matters, has publicly said the letter has not been referred to him. But there are other issues related to the Asher Kishu matter. At the level of GCOM, it is clear that Ford has not been removed as a representative of the list. And Ford has simply asked GCOM to verify that. And we have had all sorts of shenanigans and chicanery at GCOM in the attempt not to verify it. And even as we argued and we pushed and we agreed to a text of a letter to Mr. Ford, when the commission went home, the administration changed the text of the letter.
Hmm.
We had agreed to write to Ford saying that we cannot dispute that he is the leader of the list or the head of the list. The letter changed to say that we are in no position to comment on this matter. When all the information we have, all the discussions we have led us clearly to a position which says that Ford has not been removed, and therefore he's the leader of the list. Of course, there are other implications with that in terms of the whole question of the agreement between the parties, whether that agreement in itself can stand uh, legal scrutiny. That's a question. And I suppose that that is one which requires some interpretation of the court. But that is also a matter in question. So even in this practical situation of the Ashikisum case, where the whole nation accepts that she's squatting, the arms of the state, the parliament, GCOM, are not taking the kind of action to resolve this matter. It's unbelievable. We are corrupted to the bone and are existing on the basis of corruption. We have a regime which perpetuates and exists on the basis of corruption.
Vincent, it's almost 8 o'clock, and you did say you have another appointment, and we don't want to keep you over that. But tonight has been a bombshell. Um, Clearly, you've given us information here that paints a picture of rigging of the registration system, rigging the system at every twist and turn, and that what was revealed and in the recount at the 2020 election really has now come to full life, and we see how the system is being manipulated to favor one side. Um, Lord, your final comment there about the people taking political action, that of course rests with the political parties, and we will have to have the political parties deal with those issues. I noticed the WPA has put out a statement this week pointing out the correlation between a reported snap election and the inability to put these reforms in place, that a snap election itself, if it's held, would be in order not to put reforms in place, what you call that we don't have enough time to do this. We don't see the other political parties really taking up this issue with earnest. I plan to get the political leaders here to deal specifically with this issue, hopefully not next week because it's Emancipation Week, but certainly the week after, so that we can have them deal with these issues. Vincent, thank you very much. And it is clear that we will have to have you on as often as possible for us to deal with this issue. Thank you very much. And to you, our viewers, thank you all for staying with us another night. Please remember to contribute to our Emancipation Fund. A lot of you have contributed, and I've got to thank a number of you. I hope um, I can get through some of it tonight. Yes, I would like to thank Lawrence, Linda, Danny, um, Niklita, Denise, Champagne, Lynette, Pamela, Seatred, Keith, Dwaylen. I would like to thank you all for your contributions uh, to the Emancipation Fund. And let's see, there are others here. Um, there we go. I would like to thank Paul, Lorraine, Jillian B, Errol G, Delnay C, um, Sholing, Agri, Novella, Brentnell, Edward, Audrey, Lynette, Raymond, Diane, Osea, Calvin, Ingrid, Yonet. I would like to thank you. Then there are others of you who have contributed to through PayPal. I don't have that information at hand here. And I will thank you tomorrow evening. There are others of you who have been making donations through MMG. Unfortunately, MMG doesn't give the name, they give your phone number. And so I am not able to thank people who, by name, those of you who have been donating through MMG, but to let you know that we have gotten the donations. We have gotten the donations through MMG, and we want to thank you very much for your donation. As I said, MMG doesn't give the name, they give the phone number. And so we are not able to thank you by name. Here we have some here. I would like to thank Keith from Maryland. I would like to thank Barker Systems. This is a company that has contributed. We would like to thank Samuel, Gregory. We would like to thank you for your donation. Um, and I am missing some people, but I said I will make that up tomorrow night. Those of you, some of you have not been able to get to your names. Um, but please, those of you who have not contributed, please do so. We intend to spread the contributions across three communities: Buxton, Belgium, and then I'm still. I've got calls from other communities to ask if they can. It depends on how much we are able to get. We may be able to include other communities. I am looking here at a couple of other people here that we may have missed, and we're getting to them here. We said Keith. We want to thank Keith. Claremont. We want to thank Claremont. We want to thank Natalie. Natalie is always a trooper. Yvonne, we would like to thank you, Yvonne, for your contribution. And there are a few others that I have not gotten to. But please make your contribution. Please make your contribution. As I said, I've gotten a couple of requests from other communities to include them in whatever we are able to raise, and I would consider it. I told them that I'll consider it. So long. Somebody's asking about Moko Village, and Moko is close to my heart, and we will consider, depend on how much we are able to get via contribution. So please, if we're going to include Moko, I know that New Amsterdam has contacted me. And Moko, of course, like I said, is always a community that is close to my heart. But like I said, the more we are able to collect, the more we are able to distribute. I would like to thank all of you who have already made your donation. We don't care how small it is. All right? We don't care how small it is. Whether it's $20, $25, it will help to make some conky, so to Marby, to give us prizes for competitions. Because these are all things they cost. Artists perform. You usually don't pay them because they can't, a lot of artists, you can't meet their price. But, in Boston, we give them a stipend. Because a lot of these artists, they depend on this kind of thing for a living. And as I said, a lot of them don't charge us the full thing. And so, but we have to at least give them a stipend. So please, make your contribution. This year, the vultures are at the door. They're trying to give free activity and to lure people away from our traditional activities. And they're trying to shut down our activities. And we are saying, no, the show must go on, must go on. So you have the Cash App there, you have the PayPal, you have the MMG, you have the Zelle. Please do so. Please do so. Some people have been contributing in kind. Conky, somebody called to donate some cornmeal, to us, because we use cornmeal for Conky and so on. So you can contribute in money, you can contribute in kind, so that we have a very, very, very robust emancipation activity. Said we started this a couple of years ago, to help with the Buxton activities, and we have broadened it to 2 other villages, one group, Coffee 250. And as I said, I've gotten a couple of requests from other villages, which I would like to meet, so long as we're able to get the kind of donations. So thanks to all of you who have donated, and I'm urging you all to please make your donation, so that we may be able to at least get enough to give small contributions to at least 2 other communities. So thank you all very much. And what a show tonight. Vincent has been able to show us what is happening by way of rigging the elections. As I said, I intend to bring the political leaders here to really talk to us about what they intend to do about what is going on. Because some of you are right? We now have this information. We now know what's going on. What are we doing? My party, the Working People's Alliance, put out a statement this past week. Only one newspaper carried it, Kaito News. The others didn't vote on it. Stabrook News hasn't carried it, right? In which we are pointing out some of the things that Mr. Alexander pointed out tonight. We have a commissioner, Brother Desmond Trotman, who is there, and so our party gets feedback on what's happening there. And we were able to put out a statement. But the media is not giving it a splash. Like I said, in any other country, what Alexander said here tonight would be on the front pages in the morning. Would be on, but it's not likely to be, although reporters tune into these programs. And some of them may do stories, I don't know. But it's up to the editors if they don't like to carry stories that initiated here. We know that HBTV, Channel 67 on the East Coast, they do carry a lot of stories from Politics 101. And so we can't fault them for that. And I'm sure they would do a story on this program here tonight. But we are up against it, but nothing is impossible to overcome. Nothing is impossible to overcome. Tomorrow night, we continue the coverage. I think we're going to be talking about corruption tomorrow night. And that's the other big issue. Rigging, then there's rigging of the economy through corruption. I heard the Vice President Jack Dio today saying that they are admitting to corruption, and that the APNU did not admit to corruption. They're admitting to corruption. They're admitting to corruption. The corruption has been flung open because of activism and because of investigation. The corruption has been flung open by people like Paul Slow and others. Corruption in the police force, corruption and others. And now, when the shit has hit them in the face, they're pretending as though they're admitting to corruption. Whether you admit or you don't admit, you are corrupt. And if you're corrupt, you have no business being in government. And we're going to continue covering that tomorrow night. I'll have a female attorney at law here tomorrow night. And we are going to continue to push this envelope on the issue of corruption. So I'll see you all tomorrow night. Please make your contribution to the Emancipation Fund so that we can help our communities in however small way we are able to do that. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all tomorrow night.